Hello and welcome. Chris here from Swatera Media. In today's video, we're going to take a look at a few ways to animate infographic elements in Fusion. Let's take a look at the 3 different animations we'll be making. A couple of quick things before we get started. Although After Effects has the market more or less cornered on motion graphics, I've found so far it's possible to do a ton inside of Fusion if you know what kind of tools to use. And just as compositing is, in my opinion, far superior in node-based software, I've come to prefer nodes over layers for MoGraph as well. All of what we're about to go over was done in Fusion without any external apps, aside from some add-ons from Reactor. I wouldn't necessarily recommend working this way though. If you're aiming to get rid of the subscription model, I would recommend getting your hands on Affinity Designer. Not a sponsor, but I wouldn't mind it. Creating some of the graphical elements ended up being kind of a pain, but these are tasks that are trivial to complete in an app dedicated to making those sorts of graphics. I'll try to dive more into the specifics of where I think things could be done in an easier way throughout the video. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is download and install Reactor in Fusion. I've created a video that I'll place a link to on the video itself and also save a link in the description. It's an easy process, and once you're done, just come on back here and we'll keep going. Alrighty, so our first animation is this round one here. That kind of caught my eye. I was kind of looking for some inspiration online. This one was a little tricky. Involved some stuff I was actually new to, like scripting. So this number is actually connected to the value of this write-on. So to kind of go back to basics with this, where we started out. So we began with this mask paint node. So mask paint allows you to paint masks. It obviously it allows you to do similar things to the write-on. I think it's the write-on under the stroke section in After Effects. Allows you to do like if you have a cool scripted font, you can make it look like it's being written on in After Effects. I'm sure everybody who's used After Effects is familiar with it, but it's very similar. So the way that I was actually struggling for a bit trying to figure out how to get a circle. So I found that that is actually kind of hidden. So if I make a new mask paint, I'll make this active. What you do is you select the polyline stroke tool. So that creates a polyline stroke. And what you do is right click, go to polyline stroke. I think this is 6. Yeah. Then go to down here and then create and then ellipse. Okay, how big you want it to be. Now that we have this, now we just automatically have our circle. So I did change a couple of things. So if we come up to brush control, turn the softness all the way down so it's a nice solid circle. And I also wanted it to kind of start from the top. So I think I changed it to something like you could do -90. And that'll rotate it properly. And what we have next, now that I have that, all I'm doing is cutting that out of a background. Now this background is just a gradient. And of course this can be styled to your liking, however you want it. But that's just cutting out a mask. I have that connected into the mask input of the background node. So we get this cool looking shape here. And then that is connected to the background input of a merge node, over top of which we have a text tool. So this is where the fun stuff comes in. So in order for me to figure out this bit here, I actually employ the help of an unnamed leader in a chatbot, an AI chatbots who is also not a sponsor and who won't be named. What you can do to connect 2 elements together, just to kind of start the process, what we would do, I'm actually going to duplicate this. One of the lovely things about node-based work. So I'm saving a backup because I might end up destroying this. So we'll get rid of this. And what you can do is take this. So we have the text. We're going to pin this. And then we're going to pin the element, the node in which the element resides that we want to connect it to. So we'll pin this. And then what we can do is take this little plus here. This pops up by right-clicking and clicking expression. Then we can click and drag this to the start of the write-on. So what we end up with is technically right. Now it is also transforming because I had that little animation in there. So we'll hit Control P, and that enables pass-through on this transform node just so it's not animating at the moment. So it is going up, so it's connected. And I have it currently ending at about 75%, so that works. However, obviously we want whole numbers. Now, that is where the AI chatbot came in, because that helped me to actually format this. So basically what it's doing is it's connected these two elements, which we're seeing here, and then using some Lua code, which is the kind of the basis for expressions and add-ons and things in Fusion. You can also use Python as well, but I believe Lua is the one that's built in. Don't quote me on all this coding information, but this basically converts it into a whole number. So we have 1 minus polyline stroke, that input that it had selected, and then we're multiplying that by 100 and setting the floor, which is, I believe it's an absolute value operation. Once we've added all that accoutrement, now we end up with the right output. So, you know, people have all sorts of opinions on AI chatbots. For little stuff like this, where it would take me forever to figure out how to format this properly and all that, it can be a real time saver. So it's worth checking out. Us as artists, I feel, if we allow ourselves to fall behind trends, we get left behind. So I'm just on my end doing my best to keep up with the times. So that is how we've connected those two elements together. And then simply here, we've added a little drop shadow, just added a little bit of interest. So that's just the shadow node here. I've offset the shadow down and to the right a little bit. And, you know, I've made it a little bit more soft. Of course, you can make it however you'd like. That's definitely down to personal taste. And usually I'll also kind of lower the alpha. I like the shadows to be kind of subtle. So then we end up with this beautiful thing here, and I'll turn off the pass-through. So the only other thing is just a really simple transform that makes the text a little bit bigger as it animates upward. And I also have the animation set on this merge node. So I have the blend keyframed at the beginning. So that way it's not just sitting there from the start. So it very slowly blends in the whole way. Now, one thing that you'll probably notice, all of the animations are smooth. So the way that I am doing that is by way of using splines. Now, if you're not familiar with splines, I'm thinking about making a dedicated video on that as it pertains to Fusion, although it is pretty much the same in any motion graphic app, even Blender. If you've used Blender, they have splines. Not the greatest interface for splines ever, but it works. But it all works exactly the same way. So if these keyframes, so we have, this is, let me make sure we have the right thing selected. Let's use merge one. So I'm clicking on these boxes to hide and show different splines. So this is the keyframes for the blend. for the numbers here for their opacity. Now, opacity probably isn't the best demonstration of this, but let me convert these back to linear. Oh, nope, that's constant. There we go. So, and I apologize, looks like we're having some minor UI issues, but that's okay. When it's set to linear, it's going to go straight from 0 to 100. Now, if we're moving, say, a circle or doing any sort of motion, that will appear as something that is moving from one place abruptly to another and stopping abruptly with no smoothness, no slowdown. However, if we click on one of these and hit smooth, and maybe we'll do both. So what happens is, instead of going straight to 100, it kind of leaves 0 a bit slower, speeds up towards the middle, and then slows back down towards the end. And we can manipulate these to do different effects. You can even do things like drag it up, even though in this case it won't make sense for opacity because it is a 0 to 1 value. You can't make something more than 100% opaque. So this wouldn't really work, but this animation here for something that would be moving means it would overshoot its goal and then come back to its goal at the end. And like I said, I'll maybe make a video about this in Fusion if it's so desired. But basically, for the most part, for most movements, I'll basically just come into this section here and click smooth, make these keyframes nice and smooth, so that way everything kind of feels fluid. And we'll look at it more on the later animations where there's more movement. So that is basically the first one. Now our second animation was this one here. Now we got lots of charts. Oops. So we've got a few elements coming together here, and it's easier to see when it's slowed down. Honestly, a lot of motion graphics ends up being clever placement of masks and then animating things around those masks. So let's see if we can get a real time on that. So I'll kind of break down what's going on here, step by step. So the biggest challenge here was making the graphical elements, because as I said, Fusion is great for a lot of things. And of course, After Effects is the king of this sort of stuff. But even when I've used After Effects, things like these lines and like well, in this case, we'd probably want to make the mask in the software itself. But all these other lines and other elements and things like that don't need to be made in Fusion, it's really a lot better to just make them elsewhere. So what you could actually do is build all of this, save for this colored data set here in like either Illustrator if you have it or Affinity Designer. Just make all of this there, and then you can import, and you can import SVG files, which I believe Affinity Designer handles just fine. So you'll end up with all the shapes from this that you've created, and I believe they're editable too. I think when Fusion imports SVGs, it's all masks and background nodes. So you have masks that create these shapes. So you can actually, in some cases, you could probably animate them too. But it just saves a lot of time because Fusion is kind of made for bringing these elements together rather than creating them. With the mask paint node, you can do a lot. So this first one, this is just a polygon. So I created this using curves. So just like using our Bezier curves, I'm holding down Shift and dragging to the right. Holding down Shift, dragging to the right. Just making curves like this. And then to animate them, I kind of flattened it out. So I have this shape here, and at the beginning it starts out flat. So I kind of moved all those points down for the beginning, and then keyframe the end. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind too when you're animating is it's often easier to start with the end point rather than the beginning. So here I would have set a keyframe here, and then went back, pulled everything down. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind is sometimes animation can seem a little bit daunting, but it's often easier when you work backwards. So once we have that set up, that's providing the mask input for this background node, which again, in this case is just a cool 4-corner gradient. Big fan of that type of gradient. But that can be anything. And you can even, level it up by, say, using, let's see if we can make it even cooler. Let's duplicate this. And, now we're just experimenting. We're going to grab a fast noise, plug that into the mask input, and maybe make it darker overall. Because obviously this is an animation, you can do it however you like. Actually, you could pipe in a merge node, and we'll make that the foreground. So now we have some interest there. It's probably a bad approach, but you see what I mean. You can then go grab, in order to mask all of this, grab another merge node, grab a background node, turn that alpha all the way down. Now the way this is set up, we want this to be the background, so we go right click and then swap inputs. And then we'll mask that whole business with our original mask shape. And now I believe it's in the fast noise. You can choose the seethe rate. So now you have some animated stuff happening. So that's all totally optional. But I mean, there's a million different things you can do. You could even, if you want to import a video of some kind, you could bring that in and mask it. Let me undo all that. So now everything's all cluttered. So yeah, instead of this cool gradient, you could replace this background node with a loader node or a media in node if you're working in DaVinci Resolve Fusion, and mask it out that way. There's a million things you can do there. So now that we have that, we have our line here. And that is created by making a wiggly line in the mask paint node. So I'll demonstrate how that's done real quick. So in our mask paint node, and I'm going to unpin these other ones because that's going to get confusing. So we'll go up to polyline stroke, and the same thing, you make some, there we go, we get our Bezier handles. So we just create a line, and what you can do too is turn this on so you can see your stroke. Oops. So we switch to the merge. You can see the stroke, so that way if you need to draw based on something else that you have in your composition. And for me, it was this rise and trough and stuff like that here. That way you can see it while you draw. And oopsies, we're getting straight lines now. I believe we can just go here and smooth. There we go. So I just clicked the point and chose smooth, or it's Shift S. I'm gonna have to remember that one. Now that we have our terribly drawn stroke, what we could do is go to the brush controls and open up all this stuff here. And we'll switch back to our mask paint node. And I believe I turned down the softness. And then you can also choose the spacing here, which will allow you to get circles. Now, of course, like I said, as you'll see with this particular animation, there is no reason to make this in Fusion. This can be done to even greater effect in other software like Affinity Designer and then brought into Fusion, because I found that the spacing controls and the sizing controls, I didn't really like how it worked. So, I mean, we see here that our spacing's all the way up, but it's still touching. I mean, you can also go in here and put in custom numbers to make the spacing wider, but it feels as though a lot of these tools weren't expressly made for this, which I understand completely. So it's okay to use other tools too. Because to get dashes, I don't really like how it handles like that. So, to each their own. If you find that these tools are perfect and you can do all of this inside of Fusion, that is totally fine. But, I personally like having specific tools for specific jobs. And I think as a former professional graphic designer, I I prefer to use the 2D vector-based software and then bring things over. But this is how you control all of these elements here, and those will just follow that stroke. And then we have that stroke, of course, masking out a background node. This background node in particular is just solid white. So this rectangle here, I forgot what it was for a second. So this is just revealing that line. And this is where I think Fusion shines brightly. I love the way that the masks are set up. Like doing this sort of stuff in After Effects, like you had to create a track mat and stuff like that. You're just constantly creating solids everywhere. And it just gets so annoying. You have to label all of your solids that you're using for masking. Otherwise, it ends up being like overwhelming and confusing. But I love having these just, you plug in a rectangle and you animate it and you're off to the races. So that's what that is doing. Now, of course, you can see in the spline window, I have that nice and smooth. That's an example of a very, very smooth curve. So that's way beyond just easy easing. That is really slowing down towards the end of that there. Now, I'd seen a lot of videos when I first started out with Fusion about that added these without explaining how. I believe it's Option click. So hold down Option click, and you can create these. And you can even make cool shapes in your comp. So that way when you send it to your colleagues, they can have a even more brightened day. Now this is just a transform that's taking it from the edge to kind of more towards the middle. All right. Now these are just all of the different graphical elements. So we have the X line, the middle line, and the all these different lines. So that those three together make up these lines here. And those are then being merged over top of a transparent background and then masked by this shape here. So this was a shape created with the regular polygon, like the regular pen tool. And I have that wedged so that way when it goes across, there we go, the top lines appear sooner. You could do it with 3 separate masks, but I find this to be a lot easier. So those 3 are all masked together. And then that whole business is then merged over top of our previous parts of the graph. And then here we have the numbers over the x-axis. And there I went with something a little more interesting than just opacity or using a mask to kind of reveal it. I'm actually animating the spacing between the words. So I've created a text object here. Just put in some numbers. And then over time, we're animating this spacing option. And we're also animating the blend as it comes in. And it could be done a little bit nicer, a little bit, but I did it kind of quickly. So those come in. And then on this one, the wavy extra large text, let's find it here. There we go. So we have the word spacing selected. We'll click this button here, which zooms to fit. Didn't know about this for a while, was getting very frustrated with splines, and then I found this and everything got better. So that zooms your animation to fill the window. Beautiful thing. This again here, I have, a rather quick beginning, but then it really smooths out towards the end there. And that is just a matter of just dragging these things around. As you can see, it's affecting it in real time. This is something I found that splines, I watched some videos on it, didn't really click. And then I just sort of noodled with it for a while. Just grab like a circle, create a mask a background with a circle ellipse, and then move the, keyframe maybe at, the beginning, and then keyframe maybe like, 24 frames later. And just come in here and manipulate the splines until you can see the effect that changing this has. That's the best way to learn it, but like I said, I'll probably make a video on it. Now we have widgets. Well, I had originally had it just say widgets, but then I decided to be sillier. So that just adds the text. Nothing too fancy happening in here. This just moves it from here to here. And this is being masked just with a simple rectangle. And what that does is it just gives the impression that the text is coming from underneath the graph. And then I have a little motion blur turn on inside of the... Oh, maybe I have it in the merge node. No. Why does it look motion blurry? Maybe it's the transform node. Yeah. That's one thing I need to dive into is figuring out why there's motion blur everywhere and how different spots affect the motion blur. But that's for another time. But that is the basics of this one here. Also a pretty simple animation when you break it down. But I mean, anybody looking at these or any of the ones that you'll make will assume that this is made in After Effects because that's just how you do it. But, there's no reason to be bound by After Effects when Fusion can absolutely do this in a nice way. And to me, this, is a lot nicer to look at. It's a lot easier to figure out where everything is. And you can even... you'll see in the next one, I have an underlay set up so you can label all the different areas. It's a lot nicer, in my opinion. layers just get crazy, you know, like, and then you'd create pre-comps because you have to, and then, you know, stuff gets lost inside the pre-comps. You're like, oh, where's this thing? And then it's just a million different layers, and it's just pre-comps all the way down, and it just drives you nuts. I love the layout of node-based software. I primarily use Nuke for compositing VFX stuff, but you know, Fusion is also fantastic for it too. Now, this is the final one. This is probably the most intricate one. It certainly took the longest. Let's see if we can load a preview. But I think you'll be able to see the elements come together. You know, I think you'll be able to recognize at this point what was being done with what nodes. This one's a little heavier. I think that should be good. Oh, okay. Guess we're not going to get real time playback on that one. That is okay. All right. So the way this began is I knew I wanted to have this cool like cross hatching here. This is one of those big examples where just make it somewhere else. or find even a stock image of some hatching, because this just ended up kind of being a mess. So what I had to do is I drew a line that's cutting out the background node, so now we have the line that is duplicating it upward. I guess it's not even doing that anymore. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, this is really heavy. Believe it or not, even though it's just a bunch of lines, duplicated that much. So I actually had to go and render this out as a single frame and then bring it back in. You know, just use the right tool for this. I'm sure there is a better way that I'm totally missing for this hatching, but you know, that's okay. Now, once we had that, I'm just going to delete this because we really don't need it. I'll bring this out of this underlay here so that we can look at it, because then this is the hatching and that's being masked. We'll look at that in a moment. So I have this group here, and let's expand it. Okay. All right, so what these are. So this is actually just a regular B-spline. That's what you get here. So what's happening is it's just literally a straight line up, right? And then you can keyframe the length. Now I ended up having 12 points on the x-axis for the months. I believe it was the months. Let me double check. Yeah. So we first had this hatching going up, and then we had our colored bars going up. So this represents the colored bars, or the hatching bars. So this is a mask for that hatching image. So it's just, you know, cutting out all of these lines out of the hatching. Now, the problem I ran into is that, you know, it's very simple to animate that. You know, we just set a keyframe at the beginning where the length is 0. And then we just set another keyframe where the length is whatever we want it to be. In this case, the hatching ones went all the way to the top, so they were all 1. So, I mean, that is pretty easy to do. You just duplicate them over and over until you end up with all of your lines. So that was fine, whatever. The only problem is, and also the one thing they need to work on is the numbering of duplicates. This is crazy. And there are not enough hours in the day to go in and rename all these nodes. One nice thing, though, with Reactor is there is a script that I found that allows you to rename them en masse. So if we grab a bunch of these, we go to Script and go to Rename Plus. And we'll batch rename, fix serializing. Now they have numbers. They're all over the place, but now they have numbers. So that's one thing you can do. And of course, like I said, that is on Reactor. Love it for little scripts like that. Absolutely beautiful. Oh, and ignore class name, duplicate bspline, PyTest, and renamer. Those were ones that I was trying to make that didn't work out. More on that in a moment. So now we have this merging over backgrounds. So of course we have all those B-splines masking our hatching here. And those are all just being merged together, all those masks. So those are going out the output into the input of the next mask, and so on and so on. And in this next stage, we add the other bars. This is where things got a little fun. So if we'll move this over here and expand. It's pretty much the same thing. Now, the only trouble here is I found it to be kind of tedious. And sometimes motion graphics are tedious. And, sometimes there's no way around that. Now, by this point, it did start to get a little tedious just duplicating and connecting all of these over and over again. So I did attempt to use an AI chatbot to create Lua code that would duplicate the B-spline, offset it by a certain amount, duplicate it, offset the copy by a certain amount, then reference the previous one, duplicate it, offset it by a different amount. So you'd end up with this without having to kind of move everything around. Could not figure it out. I am not a coder. I went back and forth with ChatGPT for like a couple hours yesterday trying to figure it out. But the moral of that story is programmers, I think you're safe for now. It really struggled to create that for me. So yeah, that didn't go well. But I just ended up animating, duplicating them manually again and coming in here and animating their movement. Again, a very good spot to see if we can find B-spline 12. So this is the hatching, but it's the same idea. So these are all nice and smooth. So those come in. And in this case, I kind of made it so that the last couple ones come in even smoother than the beginning ones. And that's just the stylistic choice. But those are the options that you have, when you're using splines. So at this point, we have our hatching and our bars here. And again, we have another transform that just takes all that and puts it in the center. And then what we have here is just a simple rectangle, probably guessed, that comes across and reveals the hatching and the blue bars. Next up, we have our axis labels. And again, just a nice small rectangle. Now on a lot of these, just to not make them so abrupt, often soften the edge a little bit, just to make it look like they're fading in. And there's a number of different ways to handle these. One that's really cool that Fusion has as well is the write-on animation. So you can also keyframe this one down here, and it'll kind of appear like they're typing. That's a nice one. But in this case, I just chose to go with a simple rectangle. It's fast and easy, and it looks very nice. One of the things that kind of impresses regular folks, folks who aren't into this sort of thing like we are, is it's the bringing together of all these different animations. It's like your eye can't really focus on any single animation, and it ends up looking really cool, especially if you're using splines to give it even more smoothness and cool motion. So we have that text, and then the rest here is just adding all of these other labels. So we have the y-axis labels, these mask paints, and then these, I believe, are... I'm trying to figure out how I have that animated. Oh, yeah, these are just scaled. So I have... where is it? The text size. Yeah, I think it's yeah, so for these, obviously just another basic way of revealing something. I have it animating the text size for these guys. And I have them all animated separately. And of course, and I think these are all the way down here. Oops. There we go. These are also very smooth. You can see these curves. That's showing you these so that way you can kind of, if you saw a particular part of the animation that you liked, you can kind of see what kind of curve is driving it. These next ones are just the y-axis lines. So we had already gone over these, but this is just a mask paint, draw a straight line, and then kind of similar to the other mask, it's a rectangle with kind of like a wedge shape on the one side. So that way the top is revealed faster than the bottom. And of course, these mask paints are just background nodes being masked. Very cool. And of course, we have the title and subtitle. This is a very common animation that I see a lot, and I use it a lot because it's easy and looks cool. So the title has a mask that's below it, and the subtitle has a mask, that is above it. So the title comes from the bottom. So the title comes from the bottom, subtitle comes from the top, and then you end up with this. So we have the title coming up, kind of fading in, and then the subtitle coming off of the title. Very common. One of the first things I learned to do as a motion graphics person, even though I don't really consider myself a motion graphics person. I'm a VFX artist before anything else, but that's a really kind of a staple animation. So there's one script I found that's really useful for motion graphics that I had actually forget exactly where I used it, but I did use it in this, in the creation of these animations. So we select what we want to change, go to script, batch change parameters. And what this gives you is a ton of different options that are common amongst all the nodes that you selected. Now, you can select different types of nodes and change the parameters that are common between those two, however many you've selected. But this is just between these three ellipses here. So say we wanted to change the height. So the default here is 0.5. Type in 0.2. And then click apply. Very simple, but this is obviously kind of an odd example, but obviously you can see how that would be extremely powerful if you had a bunch of nodes that you needed to go in and change the parameters for. What a lifesaver. I believe I used that when creating all of the bars on the third animation, but I can't for the life of me remember. Alrighty, so that about does it. I hope you were able to get something out of this. As you can see, it's not that tricky to make these motion graphics in Fusion. You just kind of have to know where things are. There's different names for stuff instead of, adding a right-on stroke effect to reveal things like text, so that you use the mask paint node. Most of this stuff is here. What I'm going to do is, I think this is going to be part 1. I think in part 2, I think I'm going to find some stuff that one would think, you got to use After Effects to make that. There's no way to do it in Fusion. I think I'm going to find some projects and things like that, maybe just one big project like that, and figure out how to do it in Fusion, and then share that with you. Because especially after making this, I am more convinced than ever that it is very possible to do some very cool motion graphic stuff with Fusion. And it's an amazing thing too. I believe that everything I did here today can be done in the free version. Inside of DaVinci Resolve, some things would be just a little different, but not very different. Even if we have to beg to our AI overlords for Lua code that will actually work. But if you're interested in a part 2, make sure to subscribe, and that way you'll be notified. I believe you might need to click a bell somewhere. If you do, that'd just be great. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and have a great day.